Russia openly names the US and its allies as posing a direct military threat to the country, according to its new state naval policy approved by President Vladimir Putin. Are Russia and the US in danger of returning to an era of Cold War rivalry? Both Republicans and Democrats in the US have agreed on legislation that allows fresh sanctions to punish Russia, and the new legislation could largely limit President Trump's power of easing those sanctions. Can Trump reset US-Russia ties under pressure? Starting July 22nd, the first ever joint Russia-China drills in European waters started in the Baltic Sea. What message did the drills send to the US and its allies? Face-offs between Chinese and Indian troops over road construction on the borders claimed by China have sparked the worst crisis in relations between Beijing and New Delhi since 1962. As the friend of both countries, what role might Russia play in the China-India standoff?
With the aim of building the Russian Navy into the world's second best in terms of combat capabilities, President Vladimir Putin has recently approved the fundamentals of Russia's state and naval policy through 2030. How will the document shape Russia's naval expansion process? What's the significance of the major power strengthening its naval capability? And how will this influence its relationships with other major powers in the world? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Teng Jianqun, Director of Center of Arms Control at China Institute of International Studies, and Javier Zordin, freelance columnist for China Daily. We shall also talk to Alexander Lukin, Head of the Department of Business at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow via satellite, and Chu Yin, Associate Professor from University of International Relations via telephone. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Gentlemen, what do you make of the joint naval exercise in the Baltic Sea? And does it mean that Russia and China stand ready to be a serious rival, if not a competitor, to the NATO forces in this very sensitive area, under the stare and nose of a very serious geopolitical force against the Russian expansion?
Actually, this is a routine exercise between the two navies, I mean, Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy, and the continuation of the cooperation between the two countries in this regard. And in terms of the development of Navy, for example, the recent Navy policy by President Putin, actually, this is not the first policy document by Russian Federation, and just show the ambitious plan to be the so-called second largest navy in combat capability. I think actually this is a very important part for the modernization of Russian forces.
What do you think of the avowed goal by President Putin to maintain the Russian Navy as the second best? Is it a very powerful countermeasure against the alleged global strike by the Pentagon?
I think that document in some respects is a dream, because the Russian Navy today is just a shadow of its former.
Is it a midsummer dream? Or
It's because the Russian Navy is a shadow of its former self. A lot of their fleet has been sold off, scrapped, or rusted out. So they have to do a lot of rebuilding. If the poster child for the Russian Navy is their aircraft carrier, the Kuznetsov, it's a joke. It has to be trailed around by tugs and by repair ships because it's for operating condition. The question is, are the Russian people and is the Russian government prepared to spend the trillions of rubles necessary to rebuild? And what is the lesson of the 1980s when an arms race bankrupted the Soviet Union and resulted in its demise?
Isn't it a big surprise for the rest of the world that President Putin has been a very skillful and sophisticated master of international chess with a limited bargaining chips in his hand in the wake of the Soviet demise? He was able to win the war in the war-torn country of Syria, and he was also able to build a coalition with Turkey, Iran, to pose a serious threat to the United States in the Middle East. He's also able to align Russia with China, yet another permanent member of the UN Security Council, and a serious military force in the world, in a very sensitive area. So what do you think of the capabilities of Putin the commander-in-chief of the Russian army.
Yeah, I think he is a very skillful politician in every aspect. For example, the international affairs, and he just played a game in Syria with the Bashar Assad government and the anti-terrorist activities in there. And I think the ambitious plan by Putin still are facing some obstacles. For example, the money. Where is the money from? And how about the military industries give such a strong support to produce, for example, the shipyard gave the capability of the country to build up a new aircraft carrier. Actually, the new aircraft carrier plan also on the agenda already there. And I don't think at this moment this have efficient shipbuilding yard to have such a large surface ship.
Serious Chinese scholars pointed out we have very bitter memories about our previous defense treaties with the Soviet Union, or we can even go back earlier to the 19th century. China gained nothing through our serious alliance with the Russians. So we are still awash with the bitter memories, and therefore when it comes to how to view China's comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia, there seems to be large differences between ordinary Chinese folks and China's decision makers and academic elites. So what are the reasons? Let me go to Chu Yin, associate professor from the College of International Relationships, for his serious comments about the alleged disputes between policy-making elites and the ordinary folks about the future concerning this special strategic partnership between Russia and China. Hello, Chu Yin.
Hello, Mr. Yang.
Yes, go ahead with your analysis about the first question.
Okay. It's okay. Sometimes it's a sensitive problem. We know, because the founding of China is a part of the liberal revolutionary effort, but the leader is the Soviet Union. So sometimes when we talk about Russia, it's not only a simple country outside. It's sometimes a history factor inside, because it's hard to avoid the use of the personal emotional and the history experience when we talk about Russia. For the Russia, they know the two factors. The one thing is the GDP of China is 10 times to Russia. The second is the military expansion. The China have 4 times to Russia. So a stronger China sometimes is a menace to the Russia. The Russians never forget, the Far East area is robbed from China. So the weaker India is much better for the Russia to use it to disturb the China. When the Russia is no attitude, is the good attitude, because when the India and China had some problems, it means the Russia becomes more important, and it's a good choice for the Russia.
That's exactly my next question, Chu Yin. Taking into consideration the relationship between Russia and India and the fact that Russia has been a major arms supplier to India for years, why has Russia kept silent in the China-India border standoff that has been going on for over a month?
Because, when there is some problems during the China and India, and the Russia has a lot of more resource to gain the influence to the two countries. And I think maybe Putin is waiting some time to slow this question. And he wants to make clearly about two countries' attitude. If he wants to know these two countries, what solutions they want to choose. And after he knows the choice of China, he will make his choice.
Thank you so much. Do you agree with Associate Professor Chu Yin about the vulnerabilities concerning the strategic cooperation? I know at the state level, policymakers are determined to forge this very meaningful strategic alliance that matters a lot for both countries. Yeah. But we cannot underestimate and even ignore doubts and suspicions on the side of the ordinary folks here in the China at large.
As some experts said, your country has no permanent friend but a permanent interest. And the current relationship between China and Russia actually is a result of the common interest in international affairs, in bilateral relations. So I think we share this common challenges, for example, from the Western country, from the United States. In Asia-Pacific region, Obama's administration adopted the so-called rebalancing strategy toward China and toward this region. And we felt some pressure from the United States. And of course, Russia today is also facing such a pressure. For example, the sanctions, new sanctions from the United States and from EU countries. So I think this is a foundation for the two countries to cooperate in every aspect, because this is a common interest for the two countries.
Let me go back to Zordin for Harvey, for your analysis about China's ambition to be a serious blue water navy, formidable force to reckon with. Do you think the United States is ready to accept China as a rising blue water navy?
I don't think the United States has a say in it. Of course, they'd rather not have China as a blue water navy. Of course, the United States would like to maintain its monopoly as a blue water navy power, but this is not how the world works. It's changing. And of course, we also have the problem of the Thucydides trap of a rising power and a power that's not rising. So no, they don't want to have China as a blue water navy, but they're going to have to get used to it.
Let me go to Alexander Lukin. Hello, Alexander.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, you sound pretty depressed. My American guest speaker here in the Beijing studio was pouring scores on the last remaining Soviet-era aircraft carrier, Admiral Kuznetsov. He says basically that this strike group of Kuznetsov should not be taken very seriously. However, it is used by the Russians as a serious means to deter Western strategic forces. What do you think of the real strength of the Russian Navy?
Well, of course, as you know, the Soviet Union Navy was one of the strongest, probably the strongest in the world. But after that, we had not a very pleasant decade, and the naval force deteriorated quite significantly. But after President Putin came to power, there was a new program of building new ships. It's still and moderate, but it's becoming stronger. And with cooperation with China, I think, because you know, Russia sold some ships to China and also gave some technology to China, so it's natural that now we cooperate with China and have this. It's not the first our naval exercise. We have annual exercises, and so the situation is improving basically.
Alexander, President Putin says recently in his document about the fundamentals of Russia's state naval policy through 2030 that Moscow would not allow any other countries to show any signs of surpassing the Russian Navy. A lot of the Chinese here are holding their breath. They say probably President Putin was referring to China. Russia would not allow China to surpass Russia. And that's allegedly an attempt to undermine our sincerity in forging the most serious special strategic partnership, to use it as a countermeasure against the back to Asia or strategic reassurance in Asia. What do you think of the Chinese concerns? I mean, these concerns are not necessarily a reflection of the Chinese authorities, but undeniably, there might be a serious concern of some of the Chinese, skeptical Chinese viewers. They are ordinary folks, but they form part of the public opinion across the broad spectrum here. What do you think of their?
Well, I think this was mainly kind of political speech, because Chinese Navy in many ways has already surpassed Russian. navy. And this is not a problem because it's a friendly country. What Mr. Putin was referring to was probably Western fleets. But even here, we understand that there's no way with Russian resources now to kind of match the power of the United States Navy. The problem is that it's like in nuclear weapons. We need to have enough of naval force to support to protect our interests, our vital interests, especially around the borders and in some foreign countries, and cooperate with our friends. But so it's not. We don't need a numerical superiority, but we need just enough that we need for our own interests.
That sounds pretty reasonable. Russia, in many ways, is not a serious match for the American Navy, and yet it vows to construct its nuclear-armed submarines to have submarine or sea-based launch missiles to deter the American global strike. Do you think this will be a very serious challenge for the American Navy?
I don't think it'll be a challenge so much as it will be a balance. I think that our current era has been characterized by balances between countries and counterbalances between countries. So I think that if each side has enough weapons for destroying the other, that this will maintain the balance that we've had for many decades now.
Now, Mr. Tang, what do you think of the Baltic Seas? In the vocabulary of international politics, we have this word balkanization, which means it could be a powder barrel to trigger yet another major conflict. May not be necessarily a third world war. However, given the long-term ethnic and religious rivalry between major powers and small states, it's easy to have hostility, mistrust, arising from history. What do you think of choosing the Baltic Sea as a location for such a sensitive joint naval exercise? What does that mean for NATO, whose major members, for example, Germany and France, have been urged by President Trump to share more of the military spending? And Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, says we have to take our own destiny into our own hands. The understatement strongly suggests we need not rely on the United States across the Atlantic Ocean for the protection of the European security.
Yeah, I think the joint military drills between Chinese Navy and the Russian Navy just a routine job for the two countries. And last year we carried out such a joint drill in Mediterranean Sea and in the Sea of Japan. Everywhere, if the two countries would like to carry out such a drill, you can do that. And of course, you mentioned just in the Baltic Sea, it has been very sensitive between Russia and the NATO countries. And in recent months, in recent years, we have witnessed the confrontation between the two sides. But I think the joint military drills this time between China and Russia actually just to show the determination to cooperate in maintaining peace and stability in every part of the world. This is actually assignment from the UN Security Council.
But with respect,
the task force sent by the Chinese Navy to Aden Bay.
I think that the location is a little bit curious. I'm convinced that China has peaceful intentions because they, for a long time, have followed the policy of non-interference and non-intervention in other countries' affairs. However, the Baltic states are on edge about some kind of Russian invasion. And so I think that the least that China could do is to assure those nations that their intent is merely to show that they have the power to project themselves as a blue water navy thousands of kilometers from China.
Alexander Lukin, people around the world could still feel impact of your taking back of Crimea and the implications of political unrest in eastern Ukraine, and therefore countries such as Poland and the Baltic states have good reasons to fear that Russia would be a very realistic geopolitical challenge for their security, despite the deployment of missile shield programs by the NATO in these countries. So what do you think of the implications of having this show of force, a joint one between Russia at a particular moment in history?
I don't think they have anything to fear about unless they start killing the Russian population. And they have some Russian-speaking population on their territories. If they start doing that like they did in Ukraine, then maybe they have something to fear. But the Russian-Chinese exercises, of course, is not directly directed against any country, but it's a show. I think it's kind of, in general, as one of my colleagues aptly said, a process of education of the United States. I mean, if the United States continue its strange policy of alienating both Russia and China at the same time, that's the result. The result will be that we'll come closer and will be even more friendly, and will cooperate more in the military sphere. So we can only thank the United States for that.
A couple of years back,
and by the way, they can thank the United States, the Baltic states.
Alexander, similarly, a couple of years back, we had a naval exercise in the South China Sea. And the choice of this location meant a lot to other claimants who have been involved in the maritime disputes. Now, do you think this time around China agrees to go to the Baltic Sea as a reciprocal return, so that more manifestations about our mutual trust could be displayed?
I mean, Baltic Sea, there's nothing special in Baltic Sea. I think Russia and China are just showing that they are global powers, and they cooperate as global powers, and they can operate in any sea anywhere in the world, just as the United States or any other country. So I don't see any kind of problem with that. If someone thinks that, if it worries somebody, then they should think about the reasons for that. That's what I'm saying.
There must be a reason behind things that happen. Thank you so much for being with us. That's Alexander Lukin, a senior Russian expert of international studies in Moscow. Thank you so much for being with us. Welcome back. Harvey, do you think our American friends are genuinely concerned about the emergence of a young blue water navy force, China, particularly its growing global reach, will be a threat to upset the American maritime primacy?
I think that, like I said before, monopolists like to keep their monopoly. And if the Americans have to cede their military monopoly and share it with another country like China, it's not the easiest thing to do, but we have to figure out a way to coexist with each other. It's true that for a long time, United States and China have been and will be frenemies, but we have to find a way to get along and go along, or else we're not going to be able to survive on this planet.
During the Obama administration, our leader said hopefully the Pacific Ocean is big enough to accommodate the strategic needs of both powers. And perhaps that should be changed to the world is big enough to accommodate the strategic and global interests of both countries, given the global reach of the Chinese Navy. Now, having said this, let's come back to examine the messages that may have been delivered by the just concluded press conference hosted by our PLA spokesperson, the spokesperson of the Chinese Ministry of Defense, about the transformation and modernization of the armed forces in China. Now, what do you think are the crucial messages we should read into?
We have already witnessed the fruit of such a reform, which was initiated from September 2015, when our President Xi Jinping announced such a reform during the parade. And I think everything so far has been so good because of the guideline is very clear-cut, and we have a very clear-cut target to have a more streamlined, not only the forces but also the structure of our forces. For example, the commanding system already, the new commanding system already has been there, and this is very efficient. Just following the tide of world military revolution, we call RMA. This is a very important part for the country to have a very efficient, very powerful military. And if you look at our Navy, I think this is a good example for us to have a case study. Actually, during the CPC National Congress in late 2012, our former President Hu Jintao announced that China is going to be a maritime power. And actually, after that, I think we have witnessed the fast development of our Navy, not only the ships in service, but also the high qualified soldiers, sailors already there. And in terms of the security in the South China, the standoff between China and the United States, recently Donald Trump or administration also announced a new plan to have a challenged freedom of navigation. This is actually a security dilemma between the two countries. China would like to protect its sovereignty, and the United States would like to insist on the so-called freedom of navigation. I think the best choice or the only solution for the two navies, old one and new one, we should share the security, share the challenge there.
For years, since the opening up of China in the late 1970s, the armed forces of China have been waiting for serious reform, if not overhauling, of their old and perhaps outdated command and control structure in the military. Yet, our American friends and those in Europe might have a different interpretation about the impact of China's military reform and modernization. Such reform is not just restricted to areas like naval buildup, but also cyber warfare. The alleged weaponization in the outer space, China denies vehemently we would weaponize the outer space. However, something's going on there. We have the missile forces. We have not only the Air Force, the naval, but also formidable army, land-based army. Now, it's a comprehensive reform of the Chinese armed forces. What does that mean for the world leadership of the United States?
It means that we have to share it, but it also means that we have to cooperate more with China. And under the Obama administration, there were significant steps taken to increase military-to-military communication and cooperation. Under the Trump administration, we need to get back to more cooperation so we can make this a win-win solution.
Yeah, the background is, I think, two points I'd like to mention here. The first is the competition in security between China and the United States has been intensified in recent years. This is the first point. And the second point, I think the balance of power between China and the United States, in every respect, has been changed or is being changed.
Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of Dialogue. In fact, yet another question should have been asked as to whether joint naval exercise should take place in the Indian Ocean, while mounting tensions along the border between India and China captures headlines each day, each passing day. I promise to discuss this and more next time.